Welcome to FinFactor. I'm your host, Blaine Bertsch, CEO at DryRun. And if you're still forecasting your cash flow in spreadsheets, come and see us at dryrun.com. We will save you over 90% of the time and deliver forecasts that everyone can understand. And the more complicated your business, the more we can help. And I'm really excited. Joining me today is Christian Wattig of FP&A Prep. Christian is an FP&A expert with 12 plus years of leadership experience at multinational companies and fast-growing tech startups. As an entrepreneur, he teaches FP&A skills to finance teams through the Wharton School of Business and has his own company, FP&A Prep. And on the show today, we're going to dive into the approach businesses can take to transition from basic FP&A to FP&A that truly impacts corporate strategy. Thanks for joining me, Christian.
Thanks for having me, Blaine.
So, this is your area of expertise, and I know you actually have like a number of steps you go through, a number of areas that you think businesses really need to focus on. Where do they get started in making this transition?
Yeah, so many startups start without having a full-time FP&A person, of course, right? You have your bookkeeper, maybe you have a controller, head of accounting, maybe a head of finance. And a lot of the FP&A tasks are done by the founder himself or herself. It's mostly around storytelling, forecasting. But then as companies grow, they realize the need for more forward-looking work. So for more forecasting, budgeting, planning, and connecting all of that to tell the financial story of the business. And that's when companies start to invest into dedicated FP&A teams, which then keep growing as the complexity of the company grows.
So, and I guess the big thing that that really hit me when we were looking at the topic for the show is how you make it really effective. Because I've seen businesses, like I've seen both sides of the spectrum, having talked with businesses like every day. There's ones that are flying literally by the seat of their pants, and it's scary when they get into millions and they're still flying by the seat of their pants. There's other times where we see businesses that they get inundated with so much data and they really can't prioritize. They don't really know what matters. And it's kind of like they go through the motions and they feel like, well, if we have the data and we got the spreadsheets, everything must be good, but they can't move it from there to action. How does a company get to something that's truly effective and actually move the needle for them?
Yeah, that's a great question, because especially in this day and age with companies having more and more access to real-time data, that becomes a real problem, right? Companies now have more metrics, more data than any executive can reasonably be expected to look at every day. So finance and FP&A have to play the important role of pointing to what matters. So they have to run the analysis, look what the story is, and then highlight the metrics that matter. And that takes certain skills, that takes more than just pure analysis skills, because you have to learn the business. And the way I look at that is I developed a maturity model for FP&A development where companies can judge where they are on that journey, and then they can better understand what do they need in terms of skill development to advance. And at the bottom of that pyramid of FP&A skill development is data focus. So that's where you spend the majority of your time, the majority of the month, making sure that the data is accurate, the data is clean, and the data is up to date and available. And then also you spend a good amount of time in taking that data and creating standard reports based off of that. And the monthly or quarterly deck that you produce includes the same slides every cycle, just with updated numbers. That's the first stage. It's not where you want to be in terms of FP&A development, because there's a lot more value that finance teams can add. And so the next stage beyond that is the story focus. That's where you free up enough time that you can actually look what's behind the numbers, what do the numbers mean, and you start to highlight metrics that matter, because you can connect what numbers are saying to what you're seeing in the business operationally. But you're not yet considering operational metrics in your analysis and reporting. An operational metric, for those of you who don't know, are all those metrics that don't have a dollar sign attached. right? Your profit, your expenses, your sales, those are financial metrics. Most finance professionals have no problem dealing with that, of course. But then you have operational metrics like your machine utilization, the number of leads that are entering your funnel, or even the number of calls that your support hotline is getting. All of these metrics can tell you something about the future financial success of your company, but you have to make the connection. And that's the next stage in that framework where I call it strategy focus. It's where the finance team realizes that they have to break out of their silo and really start talking to the other departments and start to figure out, okay, what are their strategies? How do those strategies translate to tactics? So the actual how they're implementing the strategy, how that translates to action plans, and then most importantly, measurement. So how do we decide whether a strategy is working or not? And that requires looking at those operational metrics and taking a look at, okay, how do we actually go about connecting those to financial performance? And then the last stage on the pyramid, the fourth stage, is proactive value creation. So that's where you understand the business well enough that you can identify risks and opportunities. So the finance leader looks at the numbers and connects the dots and realizes, there's something we need to take action on. So they come up with concrete recommendations about how the company should capitalize those risks and opportunities. And that's how you can really start to have an impact. And also where I think FP&A is incredibly fun.
It's kind of interesting as you talk about this, and what I really appreciate is the fact that because we hear this sometimes where it's a company will go, okay, let's build the whole thing from A to Z, and then we'll start using it and we'll have all this benefit from it. But it's actually a step by step. You start to learn a little bit and you start to figure things out. And like before I started Dry Run, I ran a creative agency for over a decade. And it's interesting as you're talking about this, it feels like a little bit of some of my journey of building that business. You're a startup and you're just trying to figure enough stuff out and get enough money coming in the door. And then moving forward, you start to intuitively start to see what are the parts that are moving that are the big movers in our business. And so it all made sense. So it wasn't someone telling us, here's the numbers we had to figure out. We started to realize we're leaving money on the table because we're underutilizing some staff, where maybe we're not quoting maybe appropriately. We're looking at metrics of, we're probably winning too many deals. Are we charging enough? Like there's all these other little things that we started to gain from experience. And then we started to get it into, well, at that time of the dreaded spreadsheet, but we were getting all into spreadsheets. And the way you're talking, as we started to understand the business more and more, and when we got slammed in 2008, we had to do a pretty severe pivot to a different market, from basically government contracts to corporate. But we kind of had that foundation of numbers to understand we can do it, we have to do it, and how to do it. And so that's what I really appreciate is it's truly understanding the business is what makes us all work. You can't just sort of wedge it in and it's going to work, right?
And you're exactly right that you made a great point that it's a step-by-step process. You can't say, I'm building an FP&A function from the ground up. Tell me how I can get to proactive value creation tomorrow. It's really, you need to get your foundations right. You need to make sure you have a way to manage your data in a way that it doesn't require a lot of manual copy pasting or cleaning or removing duplicates. It has to be, that's the foundation for everything we do in FP&A, right? Because without good data, you can't make good recommendations. And then once you have that, you start to make sure that you build the business acumen. And I sometimes get asked, by my students, okay, how can I build this better understanding of the business? My background is in accounting or in corporate finance. How do I learn about the operations of the company? And there are a few ways you can go about that. You can start with the profit and loss statement, right? Because that's what you know best. And then see if for each line on the P&L, you understand how is the company either using that if it's an expense, or how is the company trying to grow that if it's sales or profit in the bottom line. And if you can answer the question, and then ideally you can also say, okay, what's the strategy involved with each of those P&L line items? If you realize that you can't answer some of these questions, that's fine. Then you go out, you talk to people, and you figure out, what the strategy is that links with these P&L items and line items. So that's a good way to run a self-assessment, if you will, about how well you understand the business. And then the next step, what I always recommend people is you need to increase the number of your touch points with the cross-functional team. So it's not enough if the finance team reaches out to the marketing team once a month for the month-end close, right? Where they need to understand the variance analysis. That's just not enough, because a lot of the work that finance does requires good relationships and trust. Because the thing is that leaders from other functions may be hesitant to share information with finance at times because it could be used against them, right? Finance could use the information and cut their budgets if they think the ROI isn't high enough, or cancel their favorite project because it's not performing well enough. And so it requires trust, because in the end, we want to do more than that, right? We want to help them really reach their goals, but you need to build that trust first. And that comes from having more touch points. I always encourage finance leaders to try and join those operational meetings that these leaders have anyway, because that way you're not asking them to put an additional meeting on the calendar. Which could be a big ask, but you're joining the existing meetings, and then you ask questions and you see if you can add value. And then the next question I get there often is, okay, but they understand the topic much better that they're talking about in those operational meetings. How do I even add value as a finance leader? And the answer to that question is coaching. You have to learn how to be a coach. And how do you coach? You ask questions. You ask questions that help people think outside the box and look at the issue from different angles. And if you keep doing that, you'll build the relationships. Then hopefully you have an opportunity to demonstrate that you can do more than cutting budgets. Running an analysis that helps head of sales justify their additional headcount because you actually realize that there's a real opportunity that really makes sense, for example. That's how you get started.
The interesting part, I think, that you bring up, and it's the one that always rolls around in my head from my past business, and even to dry run that I have today. This all boils down to people, and you can have the data, and in fact, as we've all seen, there's more and more data, and AI is going to deliver more and more and more and more data. It comes down to dealing with people, and like you said, asking questions. Asking them in the right way, developing relationships, developing that trust, and truly understanding the people that are responsible at the end of each of these account lines, right? And how do they actually put this into action? And so you're talking about coaching. You're talking about a lot of it is soft skills and people skills. So it's amazing how much an FP&A person, like expert, is going to have really strong people skills. How do you recommend that they actually start to develop those skills and learn those skills and put them into practice?
Yeah. Most of the people skills you learn by doing. You learn by getting yourself out there. And when I was early in my career, actually, I was working at Procter & Gamble as a financial analyst. And it was one of those days where I was head down on a spreadsheet, and most of the people have already left, including my boss and the rest of my team. But then the head of sales walked over. I was part of the sales team, so that was the highest level executive that I was partnering with. And when I saw him walk over, I was a bit concerned because I thought, oh no, is there maybe another error in the file I sent him earlier today? Or usually, he asked my boss for help. So will I even be able to help him when he comes to me directly, because my boss isn't there anymore and my team isn't there anymore? And so when he walked over, and this was 12 years ago, really early in my career. When he walked over and he came to my desk, I realized, it wasn't anything like that. He was very friendly. He asked me about the weekend. And he said, look, I see that you're working really hard, but I would like you to understand it's a process. Whenever you step outside of your comfort zone, you see that your comfort zone grows. And that was super eye-opening to me. It took a while to sink in, but once I realized that, yeah, when you do things that seem challenging and you keep doing them, and at some point they become easy. And so a lot of the interpersonal things are like that, because to really become a good presenter, for example, and you need to be a good presenter in FP&A, because the best financial analysis is useless if people don't take action because they don't understand it or they don't see how it helps them. And so we need to be good presenters. And the way to learn that is to volunteer for doing an all hands presentation, for taking on a presentation that usually maybe your boss does. And the same applies to other interpersonal fields. Like in finance, we sometimes have to challenge people and hold them accountable. For example, if they're spending more money than they said they would, or also they're spending much less than they said they would. I've seen both. And our role is to address that and to talk to them about that. And that can be uncomfortable for people when they're just getting started. But the more often you do that, the easier it gets and the more your comfort zone grows.
I'm totally stealing that. I love that line. Stepping outside of your comfort zone grows your comfort zone. That's a really terrific way to kind of think about it. I don't know if I paraphrase that a bit, but the concept is terrific. And it's the thing that I always fall back on when I'm dealing with teams and getting outside of the comfort zone is I try and remind myself. In fact, I usually have a sticky note right on my laptop that just says ask, because it's ask questions. And I know if I especially if we're under fire and there's pressure on that, I tend to push and lead. This is where we go. Mm-hmm. And I have to remind myself, just slow down and ask questions. And the more I ask questions, the more things just seem to work really well. And so it's like the number one default sort of fallback skill I always say is just ask questions, and it'll get you a long way. And even when you're challenging people, asking questions can go a long way.
Yes, absolutely.
So I want to circle a little bit back to because this is a great conversation. We've gone into some really interesting things here. So, but if you are like, if you're sort of like you mentioned, relatively new to FP&A, or maybe you're working with a relatively new business, like not maybe raw startup, like you said, where they're like, we're just kind of going, right? But getting to the point where it's like, oh, okay, this data kind of matters. I can kind of see what's going on. We can see, what's happening in our sales pipeline and how it goes in and how it converts and how we retain and how, like, all of the things going on. How do people, like, what are some of the tips to just when they're just getting started and they're going into a business and it's like, okay, step one, I got to get people on the same page here with the management team and me. What are some of the ways that they can do that to sort of gain that trust quickly?
Yeah. No, that's a good point. So what I found is one of the fastest ways to gain trust is to extend trust, to show other people that you trust them. And there are a few ways you can do that in a professional environment. One really simple thing is to share more personal stories and have a few more personal conversations around work. And so, for example, I don't ask, how was your weekend anymore? Because when you ask, hey, how was your weekend? People just say fine or too short, right? So instead I ask, so did you do anything fun on the weekend? No one wants to say no to that question, right? That they
Yeah.
don't have fun. So they say yes, and then you ask, okay, what did you do? And then they say, well, I went hiking there. Oh, I also enjoy going hiking, and you have something to connect on. That's one way. The other way is to admit mistakes, because what's so important about trust is psychological safety, and it's not enough to just tell people it's fine to admit mistakes. You actually have to demonstrate that as a leader, especially if you're in a more senior position, and share your mistakes and highlight mistakes as opportunities to learn. And I like to share the story of Google X. So Google X is a lab inside of Google where they work on the most out there projects. So for example, Project Loon, where they try to have balloons float around freely in Project Internet, or the Google Glasses that didn't work. And so there, the policy is that when they have to shut down a project, then they have a big celebration and everyone gets a bonus. So they reward failure because they're saying, well, I want people to admit when something just isn't working, because otherwise we're throwing bad money after projects that just aren't working. And I think that's something a lot of companies can learn from. There's a great TED talk about this. If you search for TED talk by a guy called Astro Teller, it's an interesting name. Astro Teller. He used to run Google X, and great TED talk. So that's one thing. And then the other thing that's important for building trust is to create an environment where people are willing to say when something is likely not going to work, to share dissent and to share negative opinions about what the company is trying to do. And that's tough because people feel hesitant to share their negative opinions about where the company is going, because then they feel like, oh, then I'm not seen like a team player, or I'm not seen like I believe into the vision and the mission of the company. But you need that. And so what can be helpful there is a pre-mortem. Do you know what a pre-mortem is? Have you heard that?
No.
Before? So a pre-mortem is where you say, okay, we're you asked it at the beginning of a project or before you roll out, a new process, a project, a tool, and you say to your team, hey, imagine it's a year later now, the project has failed spectacularly. What we're trying to do did not work. And now we go around the room and everyone shares one reason why it didn't work. And that's a mindset because it invites people to share their concerns and what the risks that they see, without those negative connotations of, oh, that person doesn't believe in the project or in the vision or in the strategy. And through those things, you maintain psychological safety and you build trust.
And it's always, it's always a challenge. I've found that through the years, especially having basically a startup and a software startup, which is, kind of on the edge of a knife for most of its existence, right? And it reminds me of one time we had, this is a couple of years ago, and we had something go wrong. I can't remember what it was. And I thought, and I realized maybe we've swung the pendulum a little bit too far the other way, because everyone on the team was kind of lining up. This is my fault. I should have done, and people weren't even involved. and I realized I'm like, I actually had to stop her and go, guys, sometimes shit happens. Like just sometimes it just happens. Like, and I thought, it was a good sign, but I also kind of thought, okay, maybe there's this other side where it's like, is everyone carrying this load of weight on them too much? Right. It was interesting. It was a little bit of a surprise, but I suppose I would rather have it, that way than the other. So we've talked a lot about, like you said, it's almost like you got the lines on the P&L and you can almost draw the line. Let's go talk with marketing. Let's go talk with this. Let's go talk with that. I kind of want to flip it around a little bit now, because as you're driving the FP&A forward, you also have to basically somehow translate all of this to the management team, to the CEO, to the other people on the management team. And it's going from the almost like that department level up to how do you um, sort of deliver those conversations, gain trust, but also get it to the level that's right, so it's not micromanaging, it's just the right level to actually move a business forward?
Yeah, so now we're talking about tailoring, right? How do you make sure that your message is received by the individual, how they want to be spoken to, and how they want to receive data and information? And that also first starts with what you mentioned earlier, is asking questions, because I've worked with a number of CEOs and CFOs, and there's a wide range of styles and how they prefer to receive information. So for example, most CFOs I worked at, they liked visualizations and graph and charts, but one CFO of a medium-sized company I worked with, she preferred Excel tables. Just a table, just give her the numbers. She doesn't need any visualizations. It's just a distractor. Just give her the plain raw numbers. And that's interesting, right? So you need to understand what are people looking for. And the other thing that people have to keep doing is actually asking the leaders that they're sending the reports to how they're using them, what they're trying to achieve with those reports. Just don't just create the PowerPoint, put it in your email and send it to the CEO, because that how they're using the reporting can change over time. So you need to stay close to people and ask, okay, how did this report help you make a decision? If it didn't, what would help you make better decisions? And then the question I always like to ask is, in an ideal world, forget any restrictions, what would you like to know about the business and when to make better decisions? And then they may say things that we just don't have, or we don't have the data early enough, but you may be able to back into it and give them something that you didn't know they needed because you just never asked the question. And that can really make a big difference in the decision-making process. And so that's selecting the metrics, but then also how you present the numbers makes a big difference. And when I teach my training programs, I teach a framework. It's called the Success Framework for Presenting. It's based on this book called Make to Stick. It's a book that was written for advertisers. How do marketing people make the messages stick? But when I read it, I thought that finance professionals can learn a lot from that. So what the framework stands for is, so it's success, it's an acronym. S stands for simple, U for unexpected, concrete, credible, emotional stories. So your slides need to be simple, they need to be able to convey the message. And I always tell people, okay, when you're done with your presentation, flip through your slides again and see if you can get the one key message within 2 seconds of looking at it. If it takes you more than 5 seconds, probably it's not simple enough. And then you need to be unexpected. With that, I mean, if you're just presenting the slides and you're just reading from the slides, people will tune off. They will stop listening to you. They will do email. They will think about the next meeting. So you need to make it more engaging by sharing voiceovers. So that means preparing ahead of time. Hey, for this slide, let's say I show the cash flow per country. My cash flow actuals was forecast per country. And then what you can do as a voiceover, you can say, well, we slightly missed our forecast target for the US, but if we drill down to the state level, actually you see that all the states are green except the state of New York. That's where we missed the forecast. So that's a drill down. You can also do a drill up where you relate it back to the total company performance. You can provide the context, so like context, action, result as a framework there. Or you can make a connection to previous versions of the forecast you talked about. You can say, hey, maybe you remember last month when I shared the forecast, that was the number then. Now it's different. Here's why. And those are all things that are not on the slide, and that's how you make it more interesting. You need to be concrete because you don't want, especially the more senior people are, the less likely they are typically to admit that they don't get something or they don't know the meaning of an acronym you're using. They just nod and then don't get it. So you need to err on the side of making it more concrete than you thought. And then credibility is also something that, of course, comes from, yes, the numbers need to be right. They need to be reviewed. They need to be correct. Tools other than Excel can help you in making sure that you don't have formula mistakes or anything related to that. But it's more than that, what people can do. You also want to make sure that when you make assumptions, that they are always quantified, especially in finance. Our role is to get people to be more data focused, and you need to spearhead that by whenever you share an assumption, it's quantified. And it should also be falsifiable. So if you only share things that no one will ever be able to hold you accountable to, your credibility drops. And then emotional is another thing that people sometimes misunderstand. Being emotional doesn't mean, hitting the table and saying this must stop, right? It's much more fundamental than that. At the core of being emotional with your financial reporting is you need to have a comparator. So every metric on the slide needs to have something that you compare it to. So there could be a prior year, budget, a forecast, because without that, you can't say whether the metric is good or bad, and there is no emotion. There's no real connection to how is the company doing. And then in the end, you package everything as a story that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the end part is often what's missing financial presentation, because the end part is the so what. So how do we take that insight and take action from it? What do we recommend the company is going to do? And that's the success framework in a nutshell.
Well, it really helps. It does exactly what the success framework does itself. Is it simplifies things. It helps clarify things. It's concrete. It's like it actually does its own thing. Really, really interesting. And I was kind of following through every step and just kind of. Sometimes I forget we're recording because I'm like, this is really interesting. It's absorbing it all. Very, very effective process. Christian, I think I want to dive in a little bit now on you, because you're teaching teams how to do this. You're teaching teams how to truly move the needle and move from this really like introductory or basic. Sometimes they may think they're doing enough to something that it actually is highly successful. Tell me a little bit about that, like what you do, how people can get in touch with you and actually engage you.
Yeah. So I'm a corporate trainer. So companies invite me to the office to teach FP&A in a workshop format. It's always very engaging, lots of hands-on exercises. I also do that virtually. So in fact, I've run a program called FP&A Bootcamp that is open to the public. Anyone can join. I ran that over the last 2 years, and I had over 500 students go through that already. So that's another way. That's 4 workshops. Each workshop is 2 hours long over a 2-week period. So it's not too much for busy professionals. And then now also I'm the director of the FP&A certificate program at the Wharton School. And that's done via collaboration between my company, the Wharton School, and Wall Street Prep, who's also a leader in the space. And that's a comprehensive program. It's 8 weeks. Each week has about 10 hours of content. And in the end, you get a certificate from the Wharton School in FP&A. And and then other than that, people can connect with me through email. I run a weekly newsletter, has about 30,000 people subscribe to that. And maybe we can share the link in the show notes as well. So people can sign up to the newsletter, and people don't realize this, but if they reply to that email address, it actually comes to me, and I read every email I get. So that's a good way to reach out. And people can also connect with me on LinkedIn. So I share a lot of my content also through my LinkedIn feed. And feel free to reach out and connect through that as well.
That's terrific. Well, thanks so much, Christian. I really enjoyed this conversation. It was super dialed in. I can obviously tell you teach this because it was bang on and really, really engaging, really interesting. Yeah, and I'll make sure that all of that information is in the show notes so people can track you down, find you on LinkedIn, subscribe to your newsletter. That's number one step. And again, if you're looking for a way to get out of those spreadsheets, forecast your cash flow, even if you have a team of a bunch of people and a bunch of locations and a bunch of currencies, all that complicated stuff, come to us at Dry Run. We will make it easy. We will simplify the message, and we will help you spend your time doing the valuable things to move your business forward rather than spending your hours into spreadsheets all the time. So visit us at dryrun.com. Thanks again, Christian. I really appreciate you coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.